You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we'll get into something that, I'll be honest, pushed the edges of my knowledge. We're talking about fileless malware, the kind of attack that never touches your hard drive, lives entirely in memory, and can steal your credentials before antivirus even knows that it's there. We've, of course, got my co-author, Dr. Mike Saylor, with me, and he breaks it down in a way that I think helps make it sense. But more importantly, at the end of the episode, we get into some real things that you can do to protect yourself, not only from this threat, but many others. And I think of particular interest is a discussion we have on Mike's view of MFA. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss there were no backups of the production database that we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Hi folks, wanted to mention my new book, Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, which is now available for pre-order at Amazon.com. I wrote it with my co-author, Dr. Mike Saylor, who's a blue team cyber defense expert. He really knows his stuff. There are dozens of books to tell you how not to get ransomware. Our book starts with the assumption you're probably going to get ransomware. So we tell you how to respond to it and how to recover from it. It's unlike anything else out there. We tell you what you need to do now to be able to respond when it happens. We covered defenses to reduce the blast radius, how to protect your backup system, incident response procedures, negotiation strategies, backup recovery techniques, and how to prevent it from happening again. The tech reviewers gave it overwhelmingly positive feedback, so I think it's going to be a big seller. Pre-order it now. Search for Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, or just look for my name, W. Curtis Preston. Hope you like it. Welcome to the Backup Wrap-Up. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy that is, I think, just as excited as I am that I got rid of a problematic tenant.
Yes, I am excited. Well, I'm also kind of sad, but it's okay. I hope you have less stress over the next many, many months, Curtis, and I hope that you enjoy having the house back.
Yeah, it's been something we started doing, for those that don't know, about a few years ago. We've been experimenting with renting rooms out, and let's just say not all of the tenants are the same. And there was a very problematic tenant, and I am now problematic tenant free as of 2 days ago. And like I said, you were my problematic tenant advisor, I think, during this, as usual.
I seem to be your advisor for many things.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of problematic tenants, we also have Dr. Mike Saylor on with us, my co-author of our book, Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, which if you're watching us on YouTube by the same channel name, you can see me pointing up at it, that just started shipping. Are you excited, Mike?
I am so excited.
You're gonna get one day, it's gonna show up in our hot little hands. I'm very excited about that. I expect a signed copy from you, sir.
Yeah, we'll have to exchange copies then.
Yeah,
because I would love to do that.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, maybe I'll just show up at your house or something.
Come on.
Yeah,
Bring your boots.
Get some barbecue.
Put you to work.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So for those that don't know, Mike and I have never met in person. Just virtually like this in the Matrix. So today, Mike, I'm going to be very blunt. A lot of times, I play the dumb guy in the room, and I just ask dumb questions, but I actually know what the answer is. In this episode, I am definitely the dumb guy in the room. What was that, Persona?
Don't take my job.
Yeah. Yeah, usually you're playing the dumb guy in the room on our typical recordings, but in this episode, I think both of us are playing the dumb guy in the room. But in this case, this thing that we're going to talk about today, I think is very interesting, but it definitely, I'm going to say a couple things about it. One is it's definitely way out there on the edge of my understanding. And two, I think this is one of those things where you should listen to some of the other episodes first, right? Some of the things, solve those things first. But this is something I do think you should be aware of. But when we get to the what do you call it? Um, the action items. The action items, I would say, are a little bit more advanced than the typical action items that we talk about. And so it's a bit like, you know, don't start talking about investing in a 401k if you don't have like an emergency fund, right? It's sort of like that. So this is sort of the 401k part. But anyway, we are talking today about something called Fileless Malware. Do you want to explain that for the mere mortals in the room?
Sure. So malware traditionally, and malware is short for malicious software. Software being indicative of something that you would download and install on your computer, and tools, security tools that are out there today to try and detect and prevent that. Uh, Fundamentally, look for things that are written to the hard drive on a computer. So if I download it traverses memory, but then as I depending on what it is, as I interact with that, it's installed or written to or saved to hard drive in your computer. And so, one of the efforts of bad guys to try and maintain some success at infecting computers, and it is limited to certain types of attacks. So instead of downloading something to be written to the hard drive in your computer, it's downloaded and is simply resident in the memory of the computer. And there are some tactics too, because if you think about it, similar to my memory, when I go to sleep at night, it gets completely erased. I wake up fresh the next day. Well, computers are very similar. When you turn it off and it's truly powered off, that memory, also called volatile memory, which requires power to maintain its content, goes away. So if I've got malware in memory and I turn my computer off and restart it, it shouldn't be there anymore. But bad guys have figured that out. And so what they'll do is, instead of writing software to your hardware, they will make modifications to the way your operating system works, so that if you think I'll just turn it off and erase all that bad stuff and turn it back on, when it comes back on, what they've written to the operating system reinfects your memory, and they're able to continue that attack.
Mike, this is fascinating because I don't think most people think about this. The second use case you talked about, though, modifying the operating system, I know I've heard in the past where malware actors infect the UEFI boot on for like a Windows system. That's sort of like things that happen before the operating system comes up. It's not technically written to disk. Are those the sort of things you're talking about in terms of modifying the operating system in order to sort of provide that persistence without necessarily writing to a hard disk or SSD?
Sort of, but some of what you described, the UEFI, also called the baseboard management controller. Those are, you have to be on the same network, like physical network, and or even physically connected for those types of attacks, but definitely possible. Uh, what what most bad guys are doing with the fileless memory stuff is it's embedded in an email, or embedded in a website, and so a lot of that content, like if you open an email that's got a lot of rich content like HTML, those graphics are stored in memory while you're viewing that file. When you go to that website and there's animation or a lot of content, a lot of that is stored in memory, to make the best, your best interaction with whatever that artwork or website is. And so that's what they're taking advantage of. What is it that's being written to memory during these different types of activities that I can hide malware in that isn't going to be detected by traditional antivirus, anti-malware software that's looking for stuff getting written to the disk? Now, today, some of the newer computers have these, TPM modules, and different hardware that looks for rogue addressing in memory, rogue read writes in memory. And so it's getting better. And I think we're evolving into, some capabilities to mitigate that threat. But for the most part, people are still being victimized by this fileless memory.
Do you want to talk about the ArcGIS attack and how this falls under that idea?
Sure. And in another episode, we covered living off the land type of attacks. And similarly, memory resident or fileless malware isn't talked about as much as part of an overall attack because it was just a piece of it. And very often you'll get the fileless malware component that then evolves into living off the land or vice versa, or even combined at the same time. And so, living off the land, we had talked about PowerShell as being one of those very frequently used tools. Same happens in fileless attacks. We compromise memory. A lot of times, memory is where credentials are stored. If I'm logged in as admin, especially if it's across a session, RDP or in a web session, a lot of that's stored in memory, and I can utilize that then to run services with those credentials, or simply run malware in memory to harvest those credentials. And so very often the fileless malware is very focused on credentials and how can I use session and credential type information to conduct more. I guess in some cases, living off the land would be an evolution, or simply, remote access. Those initial access brokers. That's all they're after is credentials, and so they'll infect a website and do like a water hole attack and get a bunch of people to go to this website and then just harvest all those credentials. But in particular attacks, and there's tons of examples of this where it's a spectrum of attack types. Is it just credentials and persistence, or is it that evolves into something a lot more complex and broad sweeping across a whole enterprise? And one of the things that I mentioned a second ago is, I can infect a machine, and in order to maintain persistence, one of the first things I'll do is modify the registry. And there's a couple of different keys in the registry for startup and initialization, and I will just inject myself into that in a kind of a nondescript way, so that it doesn't say reinfect this computer on startup. It says something you wouldn't necessarily recognize, or it looks like something that might need to be there, so that when you reboot that computer, it reinfects. I maintain that persistence even after a reboot.
Yeah, I know that
And so,
in the case of the ArcGIS attack, it looks like they modified the actual base software, right? That the tool did, so that anytime they would anytime they reboot the server, they would restart that software, and that would then implement their hack, whatever it was that they were doing. And they were in there for 2 years.
yeah, there's a lot of tripwires and contingencies that bad guys will employ, and sometimes you don't know what those are until you trip over one. And so we see this a lot in forensics, where bad guys have stuff on their computer and it's completely fine in its current state. But once you reboot the computer, or you start it up in safe mode or whatever it is, their malware is looking for those types of activities, and then it triggers some, backdoor, booby trap, what have you. And so, in the case that you had mentioned, what bad guys did was they created some persistence by rewriting the operating system on the disk during a reboot. So they're in memory, they modify the startup file, and there's any number of references to startup files, whether it's registry or some initialization file, whatever it is. And so on reboot, it then writes like a ton of things do. As soon as you tell a machine to shut down, it does nothing but write stuff. And so it's hiding its activities in the trash, right? Kind of like when the Millennium Falcon let go of the destroyer before they went to lightspeed. They let all their trash go, and they just undocked with all the trash. Well, very similarly, fileless memory, bad guys realize what's going on. And so even fileless malware resident in memory can force an overutilization of resources to make you think, oh, I bet my computer will work better after I reboot. And so the malware now goes, all right, I see the initialization command for reboot. I'm going to start writing stuff to the drive while everything else is. And when it reboots, I've actually got stuff now on the drive that can run and be more effective than just me in memory. But at the same time, when it reboots, I'll be back in memory also. Well, in your case, Curtis, they rewrote the operating system so that they were like hard-coded, embedded in that malware. You would have had to have completely reformatted and rebuilt that machine from scratch to get rid of that.
Yeah, which is what they ended up doing. They had to like re-image all the systems. By the way, great Star Wars reference, bringing Star Wars into ransomware.
So you're talking about fileless malware. Does that imply, though, that it is limited in reach to just a single machine? That its world is that single machine? I know you talked about maybe a bad actor might have multiple people go visit the same website, like the watering hole example. But really, kind of like what it's doing is limited in scope to that machine. It's not necessarily spreading across to other machines and that sort of thing. Or is that not the case?
Well, truly, memory-only resident malware would only affect the machine that's hosting it. But very rarely does it stay in memory. That's just its springboard, its jumping off point. Yeah. And that's it. That's the silent, stealthy phase one recon foothold part of the attack. It can escalate very quickly, and once it's figured out what it needs to do next, whether that's infect the rest of this computer or realizing it has access to a bunch of stuff, which is memory resident. So when you log into a network and you've got a bunch of network shares, all those authentication tokens come through memory. And so malware can go, oh, I know you've got a C drive, an S drive, a U drive, right? And so it realizes all that stuff. And when it's ready, it'll deploy and become more active across more of the physical parts of the environment.
You put the phrase "silent but deadly" in my brain because inside I'm still 5. All right, let's talk a little bit about what we can do. And when we were looking at this particular episode, this is why I started saying that. I think the first one here on our list is one that we talk a lot about, and that is MFA, and specifically doing phishing resistant MFA. Do you want to talk what that is?
Well, I have an inherent bias with MFA, not because I think technically MFA is good, but realistically, it's rarely implemented effectively. In other words, a company can turn MFA on, but then they let people store their passwords and their credentials in the browser, or let this computer be trusted so I don't have to do MFA again. MFA only works if you do it every time. Mm-hmm. It's only effective if you do it every time. And bad guys know that we're lazy, so we'll save stuff. Well, now when malware comes into our environment, one of the first places it looks is our web cache. Like, what have you stored? And I'm glad you've developed the discipline of using dedicated browsers for your banking, because what bad guys will do is they'll have an infected website, and just by going there, it harvests all the current session tokens from all of your other tabs that you have open. And so now if I can do that and be quick about it, I could potentially hijack a session you've got open with Google or your bank or whatever else, Office 365. If I've got an MFA token out of your browser, I can quickly hijack that session and potentially authenticate without any bells and whistles going off.
So are you saying then, Mike, that the best form of security is to write Post-it notes with your passwords and keep them on your desk?
No, no. I'm saying that you need to find what works for you from a security perspective that allows you to do whatever that is every time. You know, I was a CIO for a financial institution, and we implemented biometrics. And as you use the biometrics, it incorporated both the BIOS, the BitLocker encryption, and your Office 365. Well, the workforce would not support that. They hated biometrics, and they intentionally made a political issue out of it. And we ended up having to give the executive over that team the 28 character BitLocker key for all those laptops because it didn't fit the culture. And from an audit compliance governance perspective, you want to make sure that the controls that you implement are designed well, because if they're not, people are going to circumvent them, and they're just not effective. The analogy I use a lot is Texas A&M University. Whenever they build a new building, they don't pave the sidewalks. They let people walk through the grass for a period of time, and that's where they put the sidewalk. So that's a good control design. So from a security perspective, whether that's MFA or passwords or whatever it is, figure out what's going to work best for you, and that complies with minimum requirements from an organization or whatever. But using the same password everywhere is bad. Writing it down's bad. Saving it's bad. Trusting a computer's bad. So what is it that I can do that isn't bad that I'm okay doing every time? You just got to figure that out.
And so your initial response was interesting. And so obviously you're not saying MFA bad. You're just saying perhaps maybe a lot of implementations of MFA are bad, but also, and I think you would agree that passkeys would be better, but MFA, but I don't think you're saying don't do MFA. This is a good, better, best thing, right? So don't do passwords without MFA. Please don't do that, right? So if you have to use passwords, you're going to use MFA. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me see if I can tell me if I'm right. And that is, obviously don't do passwords that matter without MFA, and don't do MFA in a way that, I like your way of this idea of not allowing people to save those things in a way that would allow that session to be hacked, and try to get to a place where MFA is no longer relevant. Try to get to a place where we're doing a FIDO compliant passkey. How did I do?
I think you did really well. And one of the things I want to add to that is the value of MFA. I think a lot of people think MFA is just designed to keep bad people out. MFA is also designed to let you know when bad people are trying to get in. Right? So you get an email that goes, here's your code. I'm like, I didn't ask for a code. Well, maybe now I need to go change my password. Because if they were able to get to the code part, they already know my password. Right? So it's also an indication that someone other than you might be trying to access your accounts.
I got a request.
If you don't just click accept.
Request for a Venmo code today, by the way.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Well, so if you save your MFA, if you trust that machine, then you won't know when somebody is trying to access your account. So MFA, so passwords are just a delay. Bad guys can get your account if it only has a password on it over time. It's not today. It's probably not tomorrow. It could be next year, especially if you use the same password across multiple accounts. But if you use MFA on top of a password, you're at least making it more difficult, right? So in the real world, do you just have a lock on your handle, or do you also have a deadbolt, right? So the multi-factor part of that is having more than one thing that people need to authenticate to an account. And the multi-factor authentication part of that would be every time. So when you leave your house, do you just lock the handle, or do you also lock the deadbolt every time?
Curtis locks neither.
Actually, you know what?
His doors lock themselves.
You know what? I like your, some would say, kinetic example. My new word. By the way, I have smart locks, and my smart locks are for me And what they do is they log 5 minutes. They log every 5 minutes, whether I'm inside the house or outside the house. So if I forget to lock them, they just lock. Anyway, so look, in the interest of time, I want to move on to this again. This is a maturity level, and one of the first things, once we get all these base things out of the way, it's time to start talking about EDR or XDR. Do you want to talk about what that is and why I might want to put it in, and the kinds of things I might want to think about if I'm doing that?
So EDR today is an evolution of just our old antivirus, anti-malware, and it's designed to.
By the way,
endpoint detection and response. So anti-malware historically is really good at saying that looks bad, and I'm not going to let it do anything. So we just quarantine it, and then you would have to go into the console and look at all the stuff that's quarantined and decide I need that or I don't. Delete it or make sure this doesn't happen again. And that was typically on one machine to one machine basis. And then over time, they figured out a way to network all that together so that the people in IT or the people that care can log into just one screen and see everybody's, the status of everybody's antivirus, anti-malware. But very rarely was it capable of taking action on its own. Right. So aside from quarantining, it didn't rewrite rules or policy. It didn't think ahead. It didn't correlate events across different devices to say, well, I think it started on Bob's computer and then it ended up on Sally's computer. And, it changed something, but I think it's the same attack and it came from the same place, and just not very good analytics and correlation. So EDR is an evolution of that. So with EDR, and especially some of the newer ones that have some AI embedded in it, it can take informed or intelligent action. So in addition to saying, user on this computer did something stupid, or something weird got installed and it's doing something stupid, so now I can quarantine or isolate the device, the whole device from the network, or just the file, or just its activity, or just the user. And if I've got it configured right, and I think the user's compromised, my EDR can now reach out to Active Directory on my network and suspend that user account from doing anything anywhere else in my environment. So whether that's Office 365 or remote access or whatever the case may be. And then the other important part about EDR tools today is their ability to integrate into much broader cybersecurity tools like XDR. So extended detection response is XDR. And so on the EDR level, I can only see what's going on my computers and my servers. So I don't see network traffic. I don't see firewall. I don't see anything in the cloud. So you need an XDR tool that collects what we would consider anything on the inside of a network we call east-west traffic. And anything coming in and out of the network we call north-south traffic. So EDR is good at east-west. XDR on its own is good at north-south. You really need both to get the whole north-south, east-west traffic. So you've got a better picture of what came in your environment, what's going out of your environment, what's happening inside your environment. And with those tools collectively, now if an endpoint gets compromised inside your network, I can look at the firewall. Where'd it go? Who's it talking to? Can I block that IP address? Can I write rules on the firewall? Can I isolate the machine? Can I suspend the user? Can I look across the entire environment and all my email and all the attachments and figure out what's going on here and how can I prevent this from spreading? It's a pretty huge capability with the tools that are out there today.
And that would also cover fileless malware?
It would. So more recent EDR tools look at memory resident. And so there's agents on each computer. We use Huntress as an example. And Huntress is amazing at doing volatile memory analysis, behavior analysis. It sandboxes things. So for the couple of microseconds after you install something, it goes, well, let me see how you're going to behave. Even though some malware today will behave nicely at first, it continues to do a pretty good job. And then its integration with all these other tools as far as the ability to respond and remediate's pretty impressive.
Yeah, when I was, hang on, I went the wrong way. I was getting ready for the book. I got this little thing, right?
Yep.
What does it say, Curtis, or people who are
it's
listening?
an afternoon read, as you can see.
The art of memory forensics. Yep.
It's 800 pages. I'm just saying. Anyway, memory forensics. Definitely an advanced topic. I like this idea of having a tool that can do some of that work for you. All right, so I like the idea. We talked once again, reiterated the idea of putting more barriers in the way of if someone steals your credentials, more barriers in the way of them being able to use those. I like this idea. Again, you said more than once. You said this idea of not saving the things that and you shouldn't do it as a person, but it sounds like in a corporate environment, you should be setting up so that they're not able to save that for the credentials that matter.
Don't put the key under the rock by the front door.
Oh, okay.
Do people still do that?
Hang on, I'll be right back. All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Like I said, I definitely felt like the dumb guy in the room in this one, but I think the recommendations at the end will work for pretty much a lot of these things that we talk about. Put those barriers in the way, and then also when you get to that, when you're ready to take things to the next step, it's time for an EDR or XDR tool. All right. Thank you very much, Mike.
Anytime.
All right. And thanks, Prasanna. How are you doing?
Hello.
All right. Everyone, thanks for listening. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links from my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.